right, so point 4, over documentation. So this is a big one, and I know a lot of people love to document a lot of their processes, create SOPs, create guides on like how to actually do something. But one thing that I found is when we create an SOP, especially like internally here at grid.io, we tend to like just not end up using them very often unless we absolutely have to. So my approach for this is actually a little bit different. And essentially documenting everything is technically unproductive because you're not going to use a lot of the documentation that you have. So I have a slightly different solution for this, and that is to build SOPs into your current processes. And I'll show you exactly what this looks like and how we like to do it. But the idea here is that number one, don't document absolutely everything. Don't SOP absolutely everything because it's probably not going to get used. And then number two is if you can, try to include that within your Jira processes directly. So a very specific example of that, I'll share exactly what that looks like and how we do it at grid.io. And let's see, I'll pull up my content creation board because that is the one we tend to use more often. And in here, what we do is we literally just add an SOP kind of checklist style process, but also restrict a few things that help us to kind of work that process into Jira directly. So rather than saying have a doc in Confluence says step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, what we do is we restrict transitions on the next step. So like literally we go from raw concepts. The only option is packaging because we have to package before we go into scripting. We have to script before we go into production. We have to do the recording and content before post-production. So this actually allows us to put some rigidity into the process. And there's a couple of key things that we pull into these work items that allow us to kind of document the SOP within them. So this is one specific example where I actually had this literal description and outline in a Confluence doc. And my assumption was, hey, we put this in a Confluence doc with an SOP. Someone will go in, copy this template, pull it into a new document, link it to this work item, and then we'll be able to fill it out. We could bounce between the two, make it really easy. That adds so much more friction to a process that didn't need it. So I literally just took what I was doing in Confluence and I was like, let's just throw this into the Jira ticket directly. And if you didn't know, Jira allows you to have rich text within the description field and really any other field that's a paragraph text you want. I use this all the time and I love using this because it's kind of like having a mini Confluence document directly inside of Jira. And it's super duper handy because I don't actually necessarily need to bounce between the two if I don't have to. So that's kind of step one. Take what you can to give the templates, the context, the information directly in the work item. That way someone doesn't have to like reference an entirely different document every time they do something. They would literally go in here in our case and create a new raw concept for a video. We would pull that into packaging. We have this information preloaded here with an automation. And then we go in and we start to fill this out. And before we go into the concept locked or like the scripting phase, this would already be filled out. So we took something that was overly complex and like had multiple areas to reference it and just put it in one place. Step two is we actually added checklists. So every step of this process includes new checklist items. And we have subtasks available here, so like child work items. The reason we like checklists is that our child work items are actually our content, in this case, repurposed content. So like shorts, long form or short form videos, any kind of written posts, text posts, and we can't put in like create 3 title variations, finalize the angle. That wouldn't really work in this case because of how we're running this particular flow. So we actually build that into a checklist app, and literally every single time we move to a new column, we generate a new checklist set of items. So you can see in here, the 3 title variations and thumbnails are done. Now we have to finalize the angle and finalize the script to this format. Those were generated in the next step. So literally as we're walking through this workflow, we're generating new checklist items that are like, okay, here's what needs to happen next. Here's what should happen as of right now. And rather than looking at like a document that says, okay, here's step 1 through 100, and like referencing it there and like trying to map that back into Jira, making sure you're following it, we just build that right into Jira. And that's what I try to kind of teach moving forward, because I just found that people don't like to follow a process that's somewhere else that they have to reference and try to remember. Just build it in here where they can immediately see it and check things off as they go, where they could add their context in as quickly and simply as possible. So that's what I encourage now, moving forward, and what made even my life so much easier. Like I kind of didn't like the whole SOP idea unless it was something very, very highly specific. And to be completely transparent, like we do write SOPs for specific things, but as much as we possibly can, I like to include this directly inside of Jira. I'm using a checklist app from Power Tools for Jira, whole bunch out there. This Power Tools for Jira app lets me do kind of several things. So I like to use it for this particular reason, and we could just run automations to create a checklist item. But it makes it easier for us to just say, okay, all the checklist related things for us mean an SOP process. Anything that is a child work item or like a subtask is still an action item that can also have their own checklist items. But we kind of relate checklist to SOP in Jira, and that's sort of how we use it and how we define our checklists within our work items. So I would encourage you, do what you can to build your process into Jira or whatever tool you're using. And you can much easier kind of get people to follow that process. And it's also a little bit easier than actually writing out a fully detailed and really nicely looking SOP. So I like to do it this way, but we still do use SOPs on occasion. All right, so that's point number 4. We want to make sure that we're not over documenting and not creating SOPs for literally everything, and trying to just build that directly into Jira. Real quick, if you're running a 10 to 200 person team and you're trying to set this up by yourself, the hardest part really isn't the configuration. It's getting your team to actually use what you built. After implementing Jira over 200 times myself, that's the pattern that I see every single time. Someone builds it out, the end users end up ignoring it, and 6 months later, you're trying to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. And the mistake most end up making is that they configure the tool first and hope that the team adapts. We actually do the opposite. We fix the underlying process first and then build Jira around it. That's why it ends up sticking. Because we're so hands-on, we operate on a wait list, and our next kickoffs are 4 to 6 weeks out. And if you want to implement Jira so that it actually gets utilized, click the first link in the description.